Welcome to Prism Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 42 of ASP.NET Grid View tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss about inserting, updating, and deleting data from details view without using any of the data source controls. In part 40, we discussed about using SQL data source control, and in part 41, we discussed about using object data source control. In this video, we'll achieve exactly the same thing without using any of the data source controls. Please watch parts 40 and 41 before proceeding with this video. So we need a grid view control on our web form. So let's flip to Visual Studio, drag and drop a grid view control onto the web form. Let's set the auto format of this grid view 1 control. Alright, when the web form loads within the grid view control, we want to display ID, first name, and city columns, within the grid view control. If you remember, in the previous session, we have implemented employee data access layer, and this layer has got methods to select, insert, update, and delete employee details. Okay, so we are going to make use of this employee data access layer. We discussed about implementing this in the previous session, so I strongly recommend to watch part 41 before proceeding with this video. Alright, so within the web form 1 page load event, if not is post back, meaning if it is the initial get request, what we want to do, we want to retrieve the employee details and then display them within the grid view control. So I'm going to use employee data access layer, which has got this method get all employee basic details. And if you look at the IntelliSense, it's going to return a list of employee basic objects. This basic employee basic object has got those three properties: ID, first name, and city columns. So this is going to act as the data source for our grid view 1 control. So grid view 1 dot data source is going to be that one. And let's invoke the data bind method as well. Alright, now we will be reusing these two lines of code on this page elsewhere. So I'm going to encapsulate these two lines into its own private method. So wherever we need these two lines of code, we just invoke that private method. And I'm going to call this as grid view data bind. Alright. Okay, so we have our private method and we are calling that within the post back event. Now another thing, this grid view control should have a select button displayed. Okay, and to do that, grid view control has got a property auto generate select button, which is false by default. I'm going to turn this on. Okay, so we have the select button there. So now let's run this and see what's going to happen when the web form loads. Obviously, the grid view control should display. Let's actually set this web form 1 as our start page, and now let's run this. So the web form should load with all the employee basic details, and we should also have the select button. So when I click select, the employee row should be selected within the grid view control. Okay, and then for the selected employee, we should show his details within the details view control. So let's drag and drop a details view control as well onto this web form. And let's set the auto format for this one to brown sugar. Alright, so the next thing is within the details view, we want edit, delete, and new link buttons, basically to support editing, deleting, and inserting. Okay, and to do that, this details view has got these properties: auto generate, basically delete button, set that to true, which will show the delete button, edit button to true, and auto generate insert button. Okay, so that should show edit, delete, and new. Alright, so as soon as we select a row within the grid view control, now for that selected employee, we want to display all their details within the details view. Okay, and to do that, we need to, when we select a row within the grid view control, what event does the grid view control raise? It's going to raise selected index changed event. Okay, so let's go ahead and generate event handler for that event, selected changed index changed event. So click on the events icon and then double click on selected index changed event. Okay, so within this we want to write code to basically retrieve the employee details. And to speed things up, I have that already typed, so let me copy and paste that within that event handler method. And if you look at this, it's pretty straightforward. Look at this, we are using selected data key property of the grid view control. Okay, so if we have to use the selected data key property, then obviously we have to specify what is the data key name for this grid view control. So if you look at this grid view control, it's displaying three columns: ID, first name, and city. So the data key is going to be the ID column. So we need to set data keys to ID, data key names property to ID. Alright, so when we select a row, obviously there will be a selected data key, and then look at this. So if the selected data key is not equal to null, then I'm saying turn on the visibility of the details view control. And then look at this, we are creating a list of employee object here, and then we are invoking, look at this, I'm using this employee data access layers method get employee full details by ID. So for this selected employee, we need to retrieve the employee full details. Okay, and we have a method which can do that, but then this expects an employee ID to be passed into the method. So how are we going to retrieve the ID of the employee, on which the row which we have selected in the grid view control? How are we going to retrieve the ID? It's very simple. All we need to do is, look at this, I'm using grid view one.selected data key property, and if you look at selected data key, it's actually returning a data key object which has got a value property which will return that value as an object type. So we need to typecast that to integer. That's what we are doing, and then we are passing that entire thing to this get employee full details by ID method, which is going to return an employee object. And we are adding that employee object to this list, and then we are setting that list as the data source for the details view control. You might be wondering, why can't I set an employee object as the data source? We discussed about this in a previous session. We get a runtime error. So to solve that, we are using a list object and adding that employee to the list object, and the list is then set as the data source for the details view, invoke data bind. On the other hand, if the selected data key is null, then we know we don't have any row selected within the grid view control, in which case we don't want to display details view at all. That's why we are setting details view one.visible is equal to false. So pretty simple and straightforward. So let me run this and see what's going to happen. So obviously when the web form loads, we should have all the employees there. Select the employee, look at this. So we have the selected employee details here. Now there are several problems here, we'll fix them. First of all, let me click edit here. Okay, the details view one fired event mode changing, which wasn't handled. Okay, so let's understand this. Look at this error message. The details view fired event mode changing, which wasn't handled. Okay, so what does that mean? When I click edit, the mode of this details view control is changed, meaning from read only mode, we are trying to put this details view into edit mode. Similarly, when I click new, we're going to put that into insert mode. At that point, when we click edit or new, the mode of this details view control is changed, at which point it raises an event, and we need to handle that event. Otherwise we get the runtime exception, as you can see here. So there is this event mode changing. So let's implement that. So let's flip this web form to the design mode, go to the properties of the details view control, click on the events icon. So we have this event mode changing. So when this event is fired, what I basically need to do is I need to tell the details view control to change the mode. So change mode to the new mode. Okay, how do I know what is the new mode going to be? Did the user click the new button or edit button? How will I know that? You can make use of this details view mode event arguments object. So I want to change the mode of the details view control to its new mode. Okay, and then look at this. After I change it to its new mode, I need to do the data bind once again to the details view control. Okay, so I will basically have to write all these lines of code there. So instead of duplicating this code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to encapsulate all these lines into its own private method. So let's right click on that refactor extract method. I'm going to call this details view data bind. Click OK. So we have that all that lines of code encapsulated into a private method, and we are calling it there in the selected index changed event. Similarly, I'm going to copy that and use that within this mode changing event handler method. So now let's run this and see if it works as expected. So now when we change the mode, we shouldn't get the runtime error anymore. So I'm clicking edit. Look at this. Now it works as expected. But here we have a problem. Look at that. The ID field, I don't want that to be editable. because that's the primary key and we don't want users to be changing primary key. And to solve this, all you need to set is, I mean, there are two ways to solve it. One is you can set the ID column within the details view control as read only, or you can set the data key names property of the details view control. Let's go ahead and set a details view property, data key names property of the details view control. So data key names is going to be ID. Okay, so with that change, let me run this and see if ID column is editable within details view control. So when I click that, so we don't have that problem anymore. It's solved now. So ID is read only. But then let me cancel this and let's click new. And look at this, when I am inserting, when I put this details view in insert mode, look at the ID. It is still asking the end user to provide a value for that. But remember, ID column is an identity column within SQL Server, and for an identity column we don't have to supply a value when we insert a new row. So there's no reason why we have this ID field here. Okay, so how do I get rid of that? Obviously the easiest way is to set insert visible property on that bound field to false. But then if you look at the details view control at the moment, we don't have any fields there. All the fields that you see within the details view control, they are auto generated. Okay, so if I have to set insert visible property on that field, then I'll have to specify the field names at the design time rather than allowing them to be auto generated. Okay, so obviously I have 10 fields here: last name, gender, date of birth, etc. So we need to design all the 10 bound fields at design time. So let's go ahead and do that. And obviously the easiest way to do that is by using the designer. So click on edit fields. The first thing, we don't want the fields to be auto generated, so I'm going to uncheck this and I want to add 10 bound fields here. And then I want to set, for the first bound field, let's say I want to display, basically in TBL employee table we have around 10 columns. So we have ID, first name, last name, city, etc. We have 10 columns here. Okay, so we need to set all these as the bound fields. So the header text is going to be ID, and the data field is also going to be ID. And we have to do that for first name, last name, etc. Okay, now let me remove the other bound fields for the time being. Let's say I have only ID here, and when I click OK here, and if I flip the source mode, all it has done is it has added this fields collection, and then I have this bound field there. So we have to do this for all the rest of the columns, first name, last name, etc. And just to speed things up, I have that already typed here instead of spending time to do that manually here. So I'm just going to copy and paste those here. And let's format this HTML by pressing Ctrl K and D. Okay, so if you look at the bound fields, we have ID, first name, last name, city, gender, etc. Now remember, I don't want this ID field to be editable. So if that's the case, we can set read only to true. And we also don't want that to be visible when the details view is rendered in insert mode. So I'm going to set insert visible is equal to false. So that should solve that problem. So let me run this now and see if we have that problem gone. So Nick, I'm going to say new. Look at that, I don't have ID column anymore there. And look at this, the columns are also in the order that I expect them to be. Alright, so all that is left right now is when I click edit, and when I try to, let's change the first name of Nick from Nick to Nick1, and let me try to update this, I get a runtime error. So details view 1 control has fired an event item updating which wasn't handled. So obviously we need to implement, handle this event. So let's go ahead and generate event handler for that one. So go to the design mode, go to the properties by pressing F4, click on this events icon. So item updating event. So double click on that to have the event handler generated. And obviously when I am updating the item, I can make use of this update employee method in employee data access layer. Okay, so within employee data access layer we have update employee method, but if you look at this method, you need to pass in ID, first name, last name, all the new values. So obviously, how do I get the ID of the employee whose row we are editing? It's very easy. We can make use of the selected data key property of the grid view control, right? Because that's what is selected within the grid view control, and that's what is displayed within the details view control. So I'm going to copy this piece of code. So let's say int employee ID is equal to that one. So we can pass that employee ID to this method. And then we need to retrieve the first name, last name, city, etc. So how am I going to retrieve them? We can make use of this details view update event arguments object. So e dot, we want the new values. So I'm going to use the new values property. So if the initial value for Nick was Nick, but I changed it to Nick1, that's the new value. So if you want the old values, you can use e dot old values property. If you want the new values, we can use new values, because when we are updating the database, we need the new values. Okay, so I'm going to use the new values, and then this is actually a dictionary. I can specify the key and then get the value. So I need the value for first name. So to retrieve the value for first name, I'm just going to say first name, and this will be returned in the form of an object because it could be any data type. Right, look at this. When I give a key, it's going to return an object. We need to convert that to string. Okay, so we need to do the same thing for last name, city, gender, date of birth, etc. And just to speed things up, I have that already typed, so let me copy that and paste it within this method. Okay, so if you look at this code, it's again pretty straightforward. It's the same thing. It's just that we are trying to retrieve the values for all of the parameters. Okay, so once we update the table, then what we need to do? We need to change, when I click update here, what's going to happen? It's going to take these values and update the database table. But then it will still remain in this edit mode. We don't want that to be in edit mode once the database table is updated. We want to get it. We want to change the mode of this details view control. And to do that, I'm going to use the change mode method of details view control. Change mode to, which mode do we want to change it to? Read only. And then we don't want basically anything to be selected within the grid view control. So I'm going to say grid view 1 dot select row to -1, meaning don't select any row within the grid view control, and then call the data bind on grid view. Okay, we can't call data bind because the data source for the grid view control is set dynamically. So we need to call this method grid view data bind. So let's call that instead of grid view 1 dot data bind. All right. So now, when we edit and try to update, it should work as expected. So I select Nick, edit that. Let's update Nick to Nick1, and then say, so update, look at that, the first name is updated to Nick1. I select that, you can see the updated data there. Alright, let's say, if I try to delete this, for example, right now, look at this, I get an error. The same is the case with new as well. Okay, so when I try to insert here, look at this, details view fired event item inserting, which wasn't handled. So we need to generate event handlers for item inserting and item deleting. Okay, just like how we have done it for item updating. So let's do that. So item inserting, and let's also generate the event handler for item deleting. Okay, so what should happen when item inserting event is raised? Obviously we need to take those values and then populate that method. So obviously we have this employee data access layer method, which has got method insert employee, and to this method we need to supply the values for all these parameters, first name, last name. How am I going to get the values for them? Again, I can use this grid view details view insert event arguments object. So e dot, I have values. Now look at this, I don't have old values and new values properties here, because when we are inserting, there's no concept of old values. All of them are going to be new values. Okay, so I'm just going to use e.values property, and just like how we have used it before, first name, and that's a string, so I'm going to convert that to string. And again, just to speed things up, I have this already typed, so let me copy and paste that within our item inserting event handler method. Okay, so it's the same code except that we are harvesting all the values for all the columns. Okay, and then the same idea, once we insert a row, we want to change the mode to read only, and then we don't want any row to be selected within the grid view control, so select row to -1 and then call grid view data bind. Okay, so on the other hand, when we delete a row from details view, then what should happen? Obviously, to delete the row, we call delete employee method. And if you look at this one, it's expecting the employee ID that you want to delete. And how do we get the employee ID? The same idea like how we have got it while we are updating it. So I'm going to use this piece of code to get the employee ID and pass that. Let me actually postpone this restart and pass that to our delete employee method. And obviously, once the employee is deleted, we don't have to change the details view mode, because it's when we are deleting, it's already in the read only mode, so there's no need to change the mode here, but we still need to bind the grid view data. Okay, so with these changes, everything should fall in place. Okay, so I selected this. Let's edit nick to nick1 to nick, update that so it works fine. Let's select nick again. Let's try to delete that. Look at that, it's deleted as expected. Let's insert a new record. Let's say first name is first name, last name is last name, city is city, gender is male, date of birth is 1980, country is country, salary let's say 1000, and marital status M. Let's try to insert this. Look at that, the record is inserted. Let's quickly check the database table. So we should have that record inserted there, and let's select that. Let's try to delete that, and everything works. Alright, on this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.